"Hi, I'm Rebecca," when I was dying in that hospital bed. Barely breathing, my own family stood there and told the nurse, "She's not our daughter, let her go." They walked out, no tears, no hesitation. A week later, they came back not to check if I lived, but to claim what they thought I'd leave behind. But all they found was the letter, and by the time they finished reading it, their faces went white before we dive in. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And have you ever been cut off by the people who were supposed to love you most? This is my story, and I promise it doesn't end the way they hoped. I woke to a ceiling full of sterile light white, humming and merciless. My chest burned with each breath like I'd swallowed glass. I tried to shift, to speak, to scream. Maybe, but a tube ran down my throat and my body wouldn't obey. Only my eyes moved, darting around the room in a haze. My limbs felt like they were wrapped in concrete machines, beeped softly beside me in some rhythm that didn't match my own heart. I remembered the crash, the blizzard, the black ice under the overpass. That awful second when the car slid sideways, my headlights facing. Nothing but snow, and then the bone-crunching silence as everything went white. And now this hospital linens, plastic IV bags, that sour chemical smell in the air somewhere nearby. A nurse's voice drifted in and out, low-clipped, almost apologetic. "She's lucky to be alive, if you can call this living." Another voice responded, too soft to catch. Then footsteps. Heels slow, deliberate, familiar. I strained to see past the edge of my vision, through the blur. I recognized the outlines. My mother, my father, and just behind them, taller than I remembered, Jacob. My brother. My chest clenched. I wanted to cry, to call out, but all I could do was blink as tears leaked from the corners of my eyes. They came. They came. Maybe they still cared. Then my mother's voice, ice cold, steady as a knife cut through the room. "She's not ours. Let her go." My eyes fluttered. "I told you," she went on. "We did our part. She was never meant to stay." Jacob shifted beside her. I couldn't see his face, only his arms folded tight. I waited for him to speak, up to say something, anything. He didn't. And then my father's voice, deep, flat, spoke words. "I'll never forget. She's not going to make it. No point dragging this out. We've done more than enough." No one moved toward me. No one touched my hand. No one whispered, "We love you." Just silence and the sound of 3 pairs of feet turning away. They didn't know I could hear them. They didn't know I wasn't fully gone, but I heard it all, and when the door clicked shut, something inside me fractured, not like a scream. Not even a sob, just a hollow, silent cracking. The nurse returned, checked a monitor, jotted something down. She didn't notice the hairpin in my hand. I must have been clutching it even after the crash. A cheap little pearl pin I kept in the glove compartment. My mother gave it to me when I was 12 during a road trip to Oklahoma. I remembered the moment, how I'd stared at it thinking it was the most beautiful thing in the world. She'd looked at me then, not smiling, not exactly, and said, "It's not real, you know? Just looks pretty like some people." At the time, I thought she was joking. Now I understood. 2 days passed, or maybe 3. I didn't know anymore. The sun set and rose behind drawn blinds. The TV in the hallway flickered endlessly. Some Christmas movie, probably, but I couldn't hear it. No one came, not a card, not a text, not a single sign that someone out there thought I mattered enough to check if I was still breathing. Even the nurses moved like shadows. Once, one of them paused beside me, brushed my hair back gently and said, "Still here. Honey, you've got fight in you." But I didn't feel like fighting, not until Carmine walked in. He didn't knock, he just appeared in the doorway. Hair messy, eyes wide, breath fogging up the cold air from outside. "Rebecca." His voice cracked. I couldn't answer, but my fingers twitched just once. He rushed to my side, took my hand gently, like I'd break if he held too tight. "It's me," he whispered. "You're not alone. Okay, I'm here." He didn't ask what happened, didn't push for details. He just sat. Time slowed again, the machines still beeped. My ribs still hurt with every breath. But something shifted. Not outside, inside. It was small, quiet, but it was real. A throb, not just of pain, but of something else, the beginning of survival. Carmine stayed through the night. I drifted in and out, but every time I woke, he was still there, still holding my hand, still whispering words I couldn't fully catch. And somewhere in the drifting fog of pain and heartbreak, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of something no one saw coming the next morning. Crept in slowly, like it was unsure it belonged here. Pale winter light filtered through the slats of the blinds, painting soft lines across the foot of my hospital bed. The beeping beside me had settled into a rhythm I no longer feared I could breathe. Now shallow, but on my own. My fingers tingled more today. The stiffness in my chest had dulled to a constant pressure instead of a scream. Carmine was still there, curled up in the corner chair, chin tucked into his chest jacket, draped over my feet like an afterthought. His boots were kicked off under the window. Someone had brought him coffee cold now. Sitting untouched on the tray table, and yet he stayed for a long time. I didn't move. I just watched the ceiling, let the quiet stretch, let the truth seep in, because it hadn't been a nightmare. I remembered their voices as clearly as the IV in my arm. "She's not. Ours, let her go." They said it out loud while I lay here broken. They looked at me and decided I wasn't worth the trouble, not even worth pretending. And for the first time since I woke, the question started pounding in my skull like a drum. Then who the hell was I to them? A cough broke the silence. Carmine stirred. Sat up, rubbed his face. "You're awake," he said softly, voice rough. "You look better." I swallowed. My throat was raw, but I managed a whisper. "You stayed." Of course I stayed. He reached for the water pitcher, poured me half a cup, helped me sip. "I didn't want you to wake up alone," he said, especially after what happened. The room felt heavier. Not from pain, from knowing, from remembering. They said I wasn't their daughter. I said barely audible. Carmine didn't flinch. He didn't say no, that's not true. Or you misunderstood. He just looked at me like a man who already knew. I tried calling your parents when they left. He said I thought maybe they were in shock or confused or something. But the nurse told me he stopped, rubbed his jaw. She told me your mother asked them to remove her as next of kin, that she didn't want to be contacted anymore. I closed my eyes. The pearl hairpin was still in my hand, warm now from how tightly I'd been holding it. She said that I asked. She did, he replied. And they didn't leave any forwarding info, nothing. The water in my stomach turned sour, so they didn't even ask if I was going to live. Carmine shook his head. They walked out, silence pressed against us. I turned away, watching the faint gray outside the window. Something shifted inside me. Then not a burst, not a snap, just a slow spreading cold. The kind that made you take stock of everything you thought you knew. I pressed the nurse call button with one shaky hand. She came in a minute later, a woman with kind eyes and a tired smile. Her name tag said, "Marcy. Can I ask you something?" I said. Of course, when I was admitted, did anyone sign anything like emergency paperwork, consent forms? She hesitated just a second too long. "No, sweetheart," she said gently. "They didn't." I nodded once. "They didn't leave any insurance information either." She added, quieter now. "Didn't even ask how badly you were hurt." My chest tightened. Not from the accident, but from what that meant. They didn't ask if I would live. Marcy hesitated again, then said quietly, "Honey, I've seen bad families, but yours..." They didn't even pretend to care. She left a few minutes later after checking my vitals, and I lay there letting the truth settle, like sediment in still water. They weren't shocked. They weren't scared. They were finished with me. And somewhere deep down, I think I'd always known, not consciously, not until now, but there'd been signs, Christmas cards, that always said love from the three of us, family trips I wasn't invited to. Because you've got work, don't you? How Jacob always got the good china, the heirlooms, the attention, how my birthday dinners got postponed until next week. While his were full-blown catered events, I told myself for years that I was just independent, busy, different. But I wasn't. I was excluded, and not by accident. I let myself remember things I'd buried. like that moment when I was 19 being dropped off. At college, my mother pulled me aside, gave me a long hug that felt forced. "Don't tell people you were adopted," she whispered. "It's better for your future if they think you're real family." I laughed back, then thought she was joking, thought she meant don't let anyone define you. But now I knew exactly what she meant. I wasn't a Reynolds, not really. I was an obligation, and now I was a liability. I looked over at Carmine, who'd sat quietly this whole time. "I need you to do me a favor," I said. "Go to my old apartment in the closet. There's a box, black plastic, heavy. It's labeled docs and stuff. Bring it here." He raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" I nodded. "There's something in there. I need to see. Après. 'Cause you hurt." Left around noon, said he'd be back before sunset. The nurse helped me shift to sit upright. I ate half a cup of soup. My strength was slowly returning, though it felt like lifting bricks just to reach for the remote. Time passed slowly, marked only by the changing angle of light on the wall. Carmine returned as promised, snow still clinging to his boots. He set the box down on the rolling table beside me. It was scuffed, cracked along one side, but the lid was sealed tight. "Found it exactly where you said," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. I pulled the box closer. Old bills, loose photos, college paperwork, and at the very bottom, an envelope yellowed unopened. Still sealed with a strip of brittle tape, confidential for Rebecca. Only it read my hands didn't shake, not anymore. I held the envelope for a long time, read the words over and over. Then I looked at Carmine. If I was never their daughter, then it's time I find out who I really was. I didn't open it, not yet, but I didn't let go of it either. I just sat there, the weight of the letter in my lap. Like something, sharp and sacred, something that could cut me open but finally set me free. I held the envelope like a piece of broken glass, sharp, fragile, and full of truth. I couldn't take back once it was open. The sky outside had already turned that shade of January blue-gray. Fading fast into night, a soft hum came from the radiator behind me. As I sat at my kitchen table, a wool blanket was still wrapped around my shoulders, more out of habit than warmth. I'd made a cup of tea, but I hadn't touched it. The envelope lay open now, its seal, torn, the paper inside unfolded. I stared down at the crisp typed letter, thick stock, formal, sterile, a name at the top. Howard B. Lensley, attorney at law. The letter was dated August 17, 2005. I was 26 now. That meant the letter had been written when I was just a kid. 8 years old, 8. That was the year I moved in with them. The Reynolds, I read the first lines, again slower. This time, this letter is to accompany the official record of adoption. Regarding Eleanor Margaret Van Beck, legally renamed Rebecca L. Reynolds, adopted by George and Lillian Reynolds on August 3, 2005, in accordance with Missouri state law. There it was, my name before they changed it. Eleanor Margaret Van Beck. My breath hitched at the sound of it in my head, familiar and foreign all at once, like hearing a lullaby. You'd forgotten you knew the tune to the next part, made my hands go still. Per directive of Margaret J. Van Beck, biological maternal grandmother. This adoption was completed under condition of continued contact and access to familial records, with the understanding that Eleanor would be made aware of her biological history upon reaching the age of 18. I blinked, read it again, continued contact, made aware. I looked up from the page. Carmine had been leaning against the wall behind me, arms crossed. He hadn't said a word since I opened the envelope, just gave me space. They were supposed to tell me. I said, my voice barely more than air. They signed something saying they would. He stepped closer, quiet. Keep reading. I turned the page over. There was a second sheet yellowed around the edges, the folds deeper from time. On it, attached with a rusting paperclip, were scanned images of returned letters. Each one had that unmistakable red ink stamped across the front, undeliverable, no forwarding address. Recipient moved. There were 5, all sent between 2010 and 2013, all addressed to Eleanor Van Beck, care of George and Lillian Reynolds, all sent from M. Savon Beck, St. Louis, Mo. I traced the return address with my fingertip. Like it might still be warm, she wrote me. I whispered. She wrote me for years. Carmine sat down in the chair across from me. They never gave them to you. I shook my head slowly. I never saw these. Not once. He leaned forward. Becca. They didn't just lie. They made sure no one else could tell you the truth. I dropped my eyes to the table, letting that settle. It felt like someone had tipped over the whole story of my life, and I was just now watching the pieces float down, all the gaps, the missing photos, the weird stories. They all started to make sense. I remembered being 17 and asking why we didn't have any pictures of me as a baby. My mom had said, "We lost them in a move. Everything before you came here got water damaged." I'd believed her, and at 22, when I mentioned wanting to take a weekend trip to St. Louis, she looked panicked. My dad had stepped in quick, saying, "That city's a mess. Crime rate's terrible. Why waste your time there?" Back then, I just thought they were being overprotective now. I knew they were protecting something, all right. But it wasn't me. It was their secret. I stood up slowly, careful with my still healing ribs, and walked toward my bookshelf, where I kept my laptop. My movements were stiff, but my focus was razor sharp. Now I opened the browser, typed her name in Margaret J. Van Beck, St. Louis, Missouri. It didn't take long. The obituary popped up in the second link. Passed away on March 8, 2018. Retired schoolteacher widow of Samuel Van Beck. Survived by one granddaughter, Eleanor Van Beck. My fingers froze on the trackpad. That name, my name, they hadn't just blocked her letters, they kept her death from me too. She died thinking I didn't care, I said out loud. Carmine didn't answer right away. He looked like he was holding back 100 things at once, anger, maybe pity, but mostly just a heavy kind of sadness. Maybe she knew, he said softly. Maybe she kept hoping you'd find your way back. I swallowed hard. The ache behind my eyes was sharp, but I refused to let it spill over. Not yet. I scrolled down at the very bottom of the lawyer's letter, just below the adoption details. And the returned mail scan was a single paragraph in bold: custodial inheritance for Eleanor Van Beck as designated by Margaret J. Van Beck shall remain in trust until the recipient is located and verified. All access is frozen until confirmation of identity under birth name. My eyes narrowed. Custodial inheritance. I read it again, slower. Margaret had left something, money, property. Something, but only if Eleanor was found. Which meant they knew. I said, ice running through my chest. Now they knew she left something. That's why they changed everything. Why they hid the letters. Why they never let me know my real name. They didn't adopt you to save you, Carmine said quietly. They adopted you to erase her. I closed the file folder. My hands were no longer trembling. I was still hurt, yes. But under that, a sharp clarity, and anger, the kind that didn't scream. It simmered, focused, waited. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through contacts until I found an old number from a friend I used to work with. Someone who'd once mentioned his cousin handled estate law. I hit dial 3 rings. Hello, hi, my name is Rebecca Reynolds, but legally I was born Eleanor Van Beck. I need to reopen a trust case connected to that name. A pause. Then let me connect you to someone who can help. As the call transferred, I looked down at the table. That envelope had taken something from me, but it also gave me something back. Not just a name, a path, a fight. I didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time since the crash, I felt something almost close to power, because I didn't just lose a family in that accident. I might have found the one that was taken from me. I didn't just lose a family in that crash. I might have found the one that was taken from me, but that clarity, that power, it came with a cost. 1 week out of the hospital. I was still, moving like my bones remembered the trauma. I wasn't sleeping. Much nights were the worst, quiet enough for the questions to crawl in, so I kept busy: emails, calls, documents, and now I was sitting across from the woman Carmine had quietly arranged for me to meet, Miss Carla Dwyer, probate attorney, mid-50s. Her office smelled faintly of lemon oil and old wood, the kind of place where every surface had history. Every shelf held a thick file with someone's broken family name on the spine. She didn't smile when I walked in, just nodded and gestured for me to sit. Rebecca. She began, glancing at the papers in front of her. Or should I say, Eleanor? I met her eyes calm. Let's go with the name on file. She nodded again. All right, Eleanor, let's start by confirming what we already have. I gave her my social security number, my birth date. I even handed her a notarized copy of the adoption paperwork Carmine had helped me dig out. She studied the documents carefully, then leaned back in her chair. Her voice didn't change, but her words did legally. You are Eleanor Van Beck, and your grandmother Margaret did in fact leave behind an inheritance. I didn't move, not a blink. Carla reached for a folder at her left, flipped it open. Margaret's estate was substantial after her husband passed. She liquidated several properties, including farmland, just outside St. Louis. Investments were made through a trust managed discreetly through a third-party financial firm. She paused. The Van Beck estate is currently valued at approximately $3 million. I inhaled, but through my nose, quiet, I kept my shoulders still. Carmine, sitting a few feet behind me, let out the smallest breath, like he hadn't realized he'd been holding it, and I was supposed to inherit it when she passed. I asked, yes, upon your 18th birthday. Contact was to be initiated through a mediator, but that depended on the Reynolds family submitting your confirmation paperwork. Instead, Carla slid a second sheet toward me. I leaned in. Disappearance report filed. March 2018. Subject: Eleanor Van Beck. Formerly Rebecca Reynolds. Claim: moved without forwarding address, unable to contact. I looked up. They told the court. I disappeared. Carla folded her hands. They submitted that form. 3 weeks after Margaret passed, the financial trustee, having no confirmed identity to match, locked the funds in limbo, pending rightful claim, and no one thought to dig deeper. I asked, trying not to let my voice sharpen. They played it very well. She said, moved addresses twice, canceled your birth records under an old emergency clause. They basically buried Eleanor Van Beck under years of silence and bureaucracy. So they knew, I said quietly. They knew what they were doing. She didn't nod. Didn't need to. I sat back slowly. My fingers curled in my lap, nails pressing into my palm. I thought back to when I was 24, drowning in student debt, asking my father if I could co-sign a loan. We've already done too much for a kid who isn't even ours. He had snapped back. Then I thought he meant emotionally. Now I knew better. He meant financially. He meant they had already taken what they wanted, and I was just in the way. Carla turned a few more pages, but there's more. Margaret added a clause, unusual but effective. I looked up. She specified that if the trust was mishandled or if you were harmed in any way by the custodians, the court could initiate a review. All shared family assets could be frozen pending investigation. That landed like a brick. They harmed me, I said slowly. Carla met my eyes. I know, but we'll need to show it. Carmine stood up. We have records, hospital documents, showing they left her off their emergency contact list. Messages saying she wasn't real. Family letters from Margaret returned, marked undeliverable. Carla nodded. Good, we start there. I pulled the manila envelope from my bag. Inside were the items we'd gathered all week, the scanned letters, the discharge form from the hospital, with my name absent, even the message Romy had sent me. While I was still in recovery, they didn't mean to hurt you, Beck, but you're not really one of us. I slid it across the desk. Carla didn't flinch. This is enough to file for a preliminary review. We'll request a freeze on any Reynolds-linked assets pending fraud investigation. Her fingers tapped the desk once. Then she picked up the phone. County clerk's office, please. Probate division. She spoke with calm authority, naming codes, citing case numbers, referencing the Van Beck clause, like it was something she'd waited years to invoke. I didn't interrupt. I just watched. And when she hung up, she looked at me like someone who had just opened a very old door. It's done. She said, they won't know yet. Not until they try to touch a cent of it. I exhaled, slow and steady. They'll know soon enough. I said. She nodded. Want to deliver it yourself? I raised an eyebrow. She slid another envelope across the table. Not thick, just one letter from the trustee's standard notification sent to all linked parties. But since we know they'll stall or claim ignorance, I figured you might prefer to ensure it gets read. I took it, slipped it into my coat pocket. Outside, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows between the buildings downtown. Carmine walked beside me, silent at first. Finally, he asked, "You all, right?" I didn't answer right away. "Then they left me in a hospital bed to die. Said I wasn't their daughter." I turned toward him, and now they'll find out what it means to bury the truth. We reached my car. I opened the door, but paused before getting in. "Let's see how long they stay silent," I murmured. Once they realize what they just lost that night. I didn't sleep, I just waited for the silence to break. At 6:07 a.m. It did. My phone buzzed once, then again by the time I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table. It was vibrating, non-stop. 32 messages, 17 missed calls. My inbox lit up like a dashboard in a crashing plane. From Mom, from Kyle, even from my cousin Paige, who hadn't spoken to me in 8 years. I opened nothing at first, just watched. Let it sit there. They'd gotten the letter, the one Carla drafted, and I hand-delivered to the Reynolds front mailbox, certified copy to the trust-registered email to the family. Group thread still under my old name, Becca R. Fam. That name didn't fit anymore, but they still knew exactly who sent it. I finally tapped one message open. It was from my mother, Rebecca. "This is going too far. You don't understand the damage you're causing." We did what we thought was best. I read it twice. Not once did she ask how I was doing. Not once did she mention the accident. Just control, just panic. I deleted it, then blocked the number. I opened the next one from my brother Kyle. "You don't have to do this. It's not even about money. We're family, I snorted under my breath. Family doesn't stand over your hospital bed and tell a nurse, 'She's not our daughter, let her go.' Family doesn't ghost you for years until their bank account freezes, and the trust company says, 'Funds suspended pending investigation.' They never missed me. They missed the money behind me." Carmine stood in the doorway holding a legal pad and 2 mugs of coffee. "You ready?" I nodded, pulling my laptop closer. "Let's get it all down." We sat at the dining table side by side. No music, no noise, just click drag. Highlight every text, every voicemail. The birthday invitation. They forgot to send the hospital records listing me as friend instead of daughter. Screenshots of Facebook comments where my mother posted only child things. Proud mama under a photo of Kyle. "You'd think erasing someone would take effort," I muttered. But they did it like it was nothing. Carmine glanced over. "That's why it's important you save everything. This isn't about rage, it's about receipts." I scrolled back through an old email thread from last December. Subject line, holiday plans. My message. "Hey, should I bring anything for dinner this year?" Their reply. "We're keeping it just immediate family this year, maybe next time." That same night, Kyle posted a video on Instagram. Their dining room packed champagne gifts stacked 4 feet high, my mother laughing beside a new Lexus, wrapped in a giant red bow, the caption, "He earned it." All I'd gotten that year was a pair of fuzzy socks and a "You've always been independent, honey," before being ushered out by 8:00 p.m. And I had felt guilty for being hurt. I highlighted the exchange and moved it into the inheritance fraud emotional evidence folder. Then I opened another window public post, just a few words. "Sometimes, family is what silences you." Until one day silence becomes your weapon. I hit send it. Didn't go viral, but it didn't need to. A few dozen shares. Comments from people I hadn't spoken to since college. Then a direct message from someone unexpected. "Hi, I'm Laura Singh. I covered your accident last month for the Gazette. Would love to talk off." The record, if needed, something told me there was more to the story. Carmine raised an eyebrow when I read it out loud. I looked over at him, think I should talk to her. He hesitated. "That depends. Are you ready to open that door?" I nodded. "It's already open. They're the ones scrambling to close it." He looked out the window. The street below was quiet. The sun just starting to rise above the roof lines. "They might come to your door. Let them," I said, standing to pour more coffee. I'm not scared of ghosts anymore. By noon, we had everything cataloged, emails, texts, screenshots of wire transfers from the trust account that didn't match legal allowances. Carmine had even traced a portion of the fund that was used to remodel their kitchen. 7 months after Margaret passed, they'd used money that wasn't theirs to turn my grandmother's legacy into granite countertops. That afternoon, we met Carla in her office again. No lemon oil this time. Just business. She flipped through the stack silently, then looked up. This is enough to file a formal civil inquiry, identity fraud, suppression of legal documents, misuse of estate assets. I signed where she pointed page after page. At the end, she slid one more document over. This is the final step, she said. It notifies the court that inheritance obstruction has been alleged and freezes further disbursements until the case is resolved. I picked up the pen, signed, and with it I reclaimed more than money. I reclaimed my name. Carmine walked me home after quiet but steady at my apartment door. He hesitated. Want me to stay a while? I shook my head. They're not coming here for reconciliation. They're coming for damage control. He tucked his hands into his coat pockets. Call me if they cross a line. They already did, I said softly. He waited until I was inside before leaving. It was past 8:00 p.m. Now when the doorbell rang, no knock, just the long, deliberate chime. I walked slowly to the door, not in fear, but focus, looked through the peephole. Kyle, no smile, no apology. He looked tense, like someone halfway between anger and desperation. I didn't open the door. I just stood there, made sure my voice was calm, and said through the wood, "Did you come for me, or for the money?" He stayed quiet for 5 full seconds, then said something that made my blood turn to ice. He stayed quiet for 5 full seconds, then said something that made my blood turn to ice. You were never supposed to find out at first. I didn't move. My hand was still on the doorknob. His voice sounded softer than I expected. Not kind, just cautious, like someone walking through a minefield barefoot. I didn't speak. I let the silence do the work. Then came the next line, quieter. We lied. Because Mom was afraid you'd leave for good, she said. If you ever knew the truth, you'd disappear. And she couldn't take that. I leaned my forehead against the door, eyes closed. My lungs moved, but I didn't feel them. My brother, who hadn't visited me once in the hospital, was now delivering half-truths. Like peace offerings, another beat passed. Then he added, "You weren't supposed to get hurt." When Grandma started changing the trust, Mom panicked. She said Margaret was trying to rewrite the past. She thought if we didn't stop her, she'd give everything to you and walk away from the rest of us. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. So they walked out before they could be left behind. I opened the door, but not for reconciliation. He stood there in a zip-up jacket, clutching something in his hand. Creased paper folded unevenly. Not a card, not flowers. A letter from Dad. He said I took it. Without looking at him, and turned toward the couch. I didn't ask him to follow, but he did. He sat stiffly at the edge of the armchair like a guest in someone else's house, which technically he was. My apartment still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old coffee from that morning. His foot tapped the floor twice, then stopped. I unfolded the letter. Rebecca, we tried to do right by you. Maybe not perfect, but we gave you a home. Your mother did the best she could. I know it wasn't always fair, but life doesn't come with instructions. At least we kept you fed, clothed, and safe. Don't throw away everything just because it wasn't picture perfect, Dad. It wasn't an apology. It was a transaction. I folded the paper again, set it on the coffee table deliberately. You gave me silence, I said, and taught me how to survive in it. Kyle looked down at his hands. It wasn't meant to be like this. You keep saying that, I said, turning toward him. But I was the one living it. I asked for answers so many times, Kyle. I begged to be seen. Do you remember my 8th birthday? He nodded slowly. Mom said, "We don't do birthdays, remember? Yeah, no cake, no candles." I remember asking her why, and she said, "Because you're special in a different way." He shifted in his seat. I continued, 2 weeks later, you had a party in the backyard. 20 kids, a magician remembered the cupcakes. She even had your name iced in red. He was quiet. I believed her. I said, voice low. I believed that I was different in a special way. It took me years to realize that was just her way of saying not you. The silence between us thickened. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. I didn't come here to fight. I just wanted to try before things get worse. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was Carmine. I held up a hand to pause Kyle and answered, "Hey, they accepted it." Carmine said, "The filing's live on the probate site. Your name is listed and your grandmother's clause, the one about equal distribution unless contested under fraud, it's there too." I closed my eyes for a second. Let it sink in, this was real now. Not just a collection of memories or screenshots. The law saw me. "I'll be in touch," I said and hung up. I turned back to Kyle. "It's official, the civil inquiry is open. This isn't going away," his expression darkened. "You're going to make this public." "Yes." He stood up. "So what, you'll put us on blast, make us look like monsters? You made yourselves look like that. I just stopped covering for you." His mouth twisted. "What do you even want, Rebecca?" "I want the truth to breathe," I said calmly. "I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to stop pretending none of this happened." He stood in the center of my living room, motionless. "You have a choice." I added, "You can tell the truth with me, or stay silent and let the consequences unfold." He didn't move, just stared. Then his voice came low and sharp. "You really think the world's going to care about you now?" That stung more than I wanted it to, but I stood up to walk to the door and opened it. "I don't need the world," I said. "I just need the truth to be louder than the lie." He left without another word after the door shut behind him. I stood there for a few seconds, hands still on the knob. Then I turned and looked at the envelope on the coffee table one last time. The past had written me out. But I wasn't staying gone that night. I gave the interview and named them one by one. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The lights in the studio were soft, not harsh, like I'd expected, warm, almost forgiving Dana Coles. The local anchor known for giving survivors their space sat across from me with a kind, steady gaze. The makeup artist had offered to do more. But I'd said no, just a little powder. I wanted people to see me. Tired eyes, faint scar by my ear, all of it. No retouching. Dana adjusted her mic and looked at me. "Are you ready?" I nodded. "Yeah, Ma." And the camera rolled for a split second. I heard nothing but the hum of the lights. Then her voice came gently. "Rebecca, why did you decide to speak now?" I inhaled slowly. "Because I've spent too many years staying quiet, and silence. Silence doesn't protect you, it just hides the damage." She let that sit. Then asked, "You've brought some documents, would you like to start there?" I pulled the folder from my lap and laid it open. Inside, photocopies of my hospital report, Grandma Margaret's amended will, and what shook even me, a voice memo from the ICU nurse Dana. Glanced toward the control room. They gave the thumbs up. I reached for the transcript and read it aloud. "Patient in. Critical condition, family identified as mother, father, and son at 11:04 p.m. Mother stated, 'She's not our daughter. Let her go.' Family exited without signing DNR paperwork." I didn't cry when I read those words. Not this time. I just felt clean, like breathing out after holding it in too long. Dana looked stunned. "You were unconscious at the time. You never heard them say that." "No, but the nurse did," and she filed the report as the interview continued. Footage rolled beside my voice. My name listed on the trust inheritance clauses. With my initials, the court filing now available online. Nothing speculative, just facts. Calm paperwork. By the time the segment aired, it was 8:17 p. MI left the station quietly. Carmine waiting out front with her old red Jeep. She handed me a protein bar and nodded. "It's done back home." I set my phone on the kitchen counter and took a long shower when I came out. My phone had 64 new messages. I opened one social media app and froze. The interview had gone viral in less than 8 hours. People were sharing it across the country, especially foster care forums, adult adoptee groups, and legal advocacy pages. One comment read, "I cried with her. Same thing happened to my cousin. No one believed her either." Another said, "This is why adopted children need legal safeguards. You can raise a child and still treat them like a stranger when it counts." But it wasn't all sympathy. There were also the cold ones. What kind of family lets someone die to avoid an inheritance clause? Monsters. And you can't convince me otherwise. By morning, my adoptive mother's real estate website had been flooded with 1-star reviews. Her tagline, "Integrity from our family to yours," was now being quoted in sarcasm beneath news articles, my brother's employer. He'd always bragged about being VP at that insurance firm, was mentioned in a thread connecting corporate ethics to family trust abuse. According to Carmine, HR had opened an internal investigation. They both started calling. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, I just didn't owe them a response. Not anymore that afternoon. Carmine came over with Chinese takeout and news. The state wants to speak with you. They're opening a joint inquiry. Inheritance fraud, emotional abandonment, misrepresentation of guardianship status. I blinked. Isn't that serious? It's more than civil now. Carla Dwyer from the AG's office is reviewing your case. They've subpoenaed records already. Your family will have to testify. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I asked, is it okay to be scared but still want it to happen? Carmine gave me a look. Rebecca, fear and truth live in the same house. You're just finally answering the door that night. I didn't sleep much instead. I drove out just past 10 p.m. alone. No music, just the sound of tires on asphalt. I parked 2 blocks from the house I once called home. Their porch light was off. No signs of life. I didn't approach. Just stood at the edge of the sidewalk, looking through the black iron gate. It hadn't changed, not one bit. Same cracked cement path. Same crooked wind chimes. Then a voice behind me said, Rebecca. I turned. It was Mrs. Simons, the neighbor who used to hand out cinnamon muffins on Sundays. She looked older now, thinner. I thought that was you, she said. I saw the interview. We stood in silence for a moment. Then she added, voice low. We always wondered why you seemed so quiet. I didn't know what to say, so I smiled just a little. They never let you bring friends over. She went on. And your mom, well, she always said you had adjustment issues, but I remember you were just polite, always cleaning up after other people's messes. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just nodded. She patted my arm. I'm glad you spoke up. It matters. After she walked away. I lingered another 5 minutes, then returned to my car on the drive home. A memory drifted in the day I first stepped foot in that house. I must have been 5. Clutching the hand of a social worker named Terry, carrying a plastic bag with 2 t-shirts and 1 stuffed bunny. I remember thinking the house looked like a palace I thought I'd found forever. Till now, I realized I'd walked into a rare, wearing a pretty dress that night. I posted just one thing online, a black and white photo of my grandmother holding me as a baby. She was wearing her nurse's scrubs, and I had my cheek against her collarbone. I typed one line beneath it. She never stopped looking for me now. The world knows why I didn't sleep the night before. Hearing it wasn't nerves. It was something else, like my body knew the truth was about to land, and it didn't want to miss a moment around 3:40 a.m. I finally stopped tossing and just sat at the kitchen table, sipping lukewarm peppermint tea. I watched the dawn break through the small crack between the blinds. By 7:15, I was dressed and standing by the front door. Carmine pulled up in his red Jeep. Same one he's driven since college. He honked once short, not rushed. I stepped out my documents, tucked neatly in a black folder as I climbed in. He glanced over and said, "This is just paperwork, but it matters." I nodded. I know the drive to the courthouse was quiet. No music, no talking. Just that heavy electric silence between 2 people who both know a storm's about to hit. But this time, we're the ones who brought it. We pulled into the lot 15 minutes early. A small crowd was already gathered outside the courthouse steps. Reporters, cameramen, and of course strangers holding signs that said things like, "Justice for Rebecca," and "Silence is complicity." I wasn't expecting that inside. The air was too cold, typical for buildings like this. We passed through security, took the elevator up, and were shown to the deposition room by a young assistant in a gray suit. Her badge read M. Linwood. She didn't make small talk, just pointed us to the conference table and said, "They're on their way." They meant my family. Well, what used to be 10 minutes later, the door opened. My brother walked in first. Jacket, sharp eyes, bloodshot jaw, tight. He scanned the room and nodded stiffly at Carmine. Didn't even look at me. Then came my mother. She wore sunglasses inside a move so theatrical it made the court reporter lift one brow. She looked thinner than I remembered. Lips drawn tight, hair perfectly set. She took the seat farthest from me. There was a moment of pause. No one else walked in. No dad. Carmine leaned over slightly and whispered, "He's not coming," left the state. Tuesday, I blinked. Coward, the court reporter began the session laying out the basics. Date, time, parties present, purpose. Then she did something unexpected. She read the hospital memo aloud. Patient in ICU, mother stated, "She's not our daughter, let her go." Family exited without signing documentation. Nurse filed this statement. 11:00 for 4p. You could hear the second hand on the wall clock ticking. When she finished, the silence was that thick. Then the presiding legal officer, Judge Karen Doyle, firm but fair, turned to my mother and asked plainly, "Did you say this?" My mother didn't lift her head. She mumbled, "It was a misunderstanding." Carmine didn't wait for rebuttal. He slid a stack of neatly labeled folders across the table. "Your Honor, we are submitting evidence that post-accident the family applied for access to a trust fund they had not disclosed to the beneficiary, Judge Doyle." Nodded, proceed. He flipped open the top folder. "Here's a forged hold request from the USPS to intercept mail directed to my client. The signatures do not match hers. Here's also a series of emails between Miss R. Goldsmith and the bank's private wealth division applying for early release of funds under the claim that Ms. Rebecca, my client, was no longer legally competent." I stayed still. My hands never moved, because for the first time it wasn't just me saying it. It wasn't she said, they said. It was there in ink, in bank seals, in timestamps. Judge Doyle looked toward me. "Did you ever receive official notice of this trust?" I answered calmly, "No, not until I filed a records request." My mother's jaw clenched. Then Carmine opened a new folder. "There's more. A clause in the original will filed by Miss Margaret Hartman," the grandmother states clearly. "In the event Rebecca M. is located and identified as alive, all inheritance processes are to freeze until her personal approval is filed in court." He placed the notarized clause down with a satisfying tap. Signed, witnessed. Never revoked it. Landed like thunder. My brother shifted in his seat. Finally, he stood. "Rebecca." His voice cracked. "We didn't know how to handle everything. You were gone. Mom was breaking down." I raised my hand. "Stop," he did. "You weren't scared for me. You were scared of being exposed. That's not the same as love." He sat back down. Judge Doyle glanced over the paperwork, then looked to her clerk, open a full investigation into the management of the trust and any unlawful withdrawals over the past 7 years. That was it. That's all it took. Not a courtroom meltdown, not me yelling, just calm facts. The room emptied slowly. My mother bolted first. Sunglasses still on, though the hallway was dark. Reporters surged forward. I didn't flinch. Cameras flashed questions. Flew. "Rebecca, do you feel vindicated? What message do you want others in your position to hear? Do you plan to press charges?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Carmine placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. We walked down the steps together, not saying a word, past the press, past the cameras, into the bright afternoon light. I felt it then. Not joy, not revenge, peace, a kind that doesn't come from winning, just from finally being heard. 1 week later, I received a letter, not from them, from someone I never thought I'd hear from again. It arrived in a plain white envelope tucked between a utility bill and a charity flyer. No return address on the front. Just my name in neat, slightly shaky. Cursive, Rebecca M. Hartman. I sat with it for a moment at the kitchen counter, fingers running over the edges. The postmark read Missouri. That alone made my chest tighten. My grandmother had been born there. I hadn't thought about that in years. The kettle behind me clicked off. I poured my tea, sat down, and opened the envelope with slow, deliberate care. Like I already knew what it held could change something deeper than just a morning inside. Was a single page. "Dear Rebecca, I saw the news coverage. I saw you standing there in that courtroom, and I knew there she is. We never stopped looking. Not really when your grandmother passed. It felt like the thread had snapped, but I kept the picture just in case. If this reaches you, I would love to talk. No pressure, no press, just truth with love. Your Aunt Meredith." Maggie's sister. Folded inside the letter was an old photo, slightly faded edges, curling a baby, maybe 6 months old. curled in a blanket, sleeping in the arms of an older woman I knew in an instant. Grandma Maggie, not the one who raised me, the one who chose me, who tried, and who left behind this thread. I stared at that photo for a long while, not crying, not even shaking, just breathing, really breathing. For what felt like the first time in years, I pulled out a pen and a piece of plain stationery. Dear Aunt Meredith, thank you. Yes, I'd like to know more. And yes, I remember her even now. Sincerely, Rebecca. 2 days later, we met at a small cafe, just off an old country road outside of Lexington. I chose the place quiet, tucked behind a bookstore. No cameras, no curiosity seekers, just 2 women and a pot of black coffee between them. Meredith looked like the kind of woman who carried her years with purpose. Her hair was mostly silver, tied back, eyes sharp but not cold. She stood as I walked in, gave me a hug that was neither too tight nor too stiff. Just right, Rebecca, she said gently. You look just like her. We sat. The cafe was nearly empty, just a college kid studying in the corner and a young couple whispering over pastries. I'm sorry it took so long, she said after a moment. Your mother, Celia, she died during childbirth. It wasn't supposed to go that way. She was only 22. I nodded, my throat thick. I was 25. Maggie insisted on raising you herself. But there were complications, legal ones. Your father didn't want anything to do with us. Said we were unstable, unfit, so the state got involved. I listened, hands wrapped around my mug for warmth, more than comfort. They placed you with the Goldsmiths. It was supposed to be temporary, just foster care, until Maggie got everything sorted, but then suddenly you were gone. Moved sealed records. We tried everything. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Photos, letters we wrote, but never got to send hospital papers. Your mother's bracelet inside was a simple cotton bracelet. Pink thread, faded but still legible. Baby girl Hartman. I blinked hard. So all this time you weren't unwanted, Meredith said firmly. Leaning in, you were protected, and then you were lost to us. Not by choice. Never by choice. I nodded slowly. That's what they never told me. They always made it seem like I was just handed off. Her eyes softened because that's easier for people like them. They rewrite the story. We've always known that the conversation stretched on 2 hours, maybe more. I learned about my mother's laugh, her favorite song, how she used to sneak bread crusts to stray dogs, tiny mundane details that somehow filled entire hollows in my chest. Meredith didn't ask for anything, not forgiveness, not attention, just to sit. To remember to share before we parted, she touched my arm. You don't have to reach back. I just wanted you to know we never stopped loving you, I answered softly. I'd like to keep in touch, and I meant it 2 weeks later. I stood before the judge once more, and this time there was no argument, no protest. The deposition had done its work, and my adoptive family, if I could even call them that, had no grounds to challenge the estate anymore. Their lawyer didn't even show. It was quick, efficient. Judge Doyle scanned the paperwork, then said, Final motion approved. All assets, including the restored trust, shall transfer to Mrs. Rebecca Hartman under full guardianship of herself. Name reinstatement granted. I signed the last document with steady hands. It wasn't about the money, it never was. It was about being seen. Later that month, I started volunteering at the local library twice a week, Tuesday and Friday afternoons. I didn't tell anyone, not the press, not even Meredith. I just walked in, asked if they needed a reader, and started showing up. There's something peaceful about sitting in a circle of children, picture books in hand, voices echoing in laughter and curiosity. One little girl, tiny red curls, wild around her face, tilted her head one day and asked, Do you have a family? I smiled. I do it. Just took me a while to find them. And she nodded like that made perfect sense. On a warm Saturday morning the following year, I drove out to Missouri. It took hours, but I didn't mind. Winding roads, soft radio music. The kind of sky that looks like it might rain but holds back. I parked by a small cemetery surrounded by wildflowers and quiet trees. The headstone was modest but well cared for. Margaret L. Hartman, beloved mother-sister fighter. I knelt and placed a single lily at the base. I got your letter too, Grandma, I whispered. I lived. I didn't stay long. I didn't need to. As I stood and turned, the wind picked up just enough to rustle the leaves, lift the corners of my jacket. I took one last glance, then walked back to the car. No longer haunted, no longer waiting, just whole.